Welcome back. Hump Day.
Hello, everybody. Oh, Hump Day. Where's my
Hump Day?
Where's my hump? I don't know. Welcome, everybody, to Two Chaps, Many Cultures. This is Hump Day, as some people call it. I call it a regular work day. I don't know what this humping is all about. I don't know.
Neither do I.
All right.
Especially in this day and age, where it's just another day, another dollar, another wonderful global day for all the beautiful people around the world, and we're coming to you live. Well, assuming you're watching us live here at Two Chaps Mini Cultures. How are you today, pal?
I am excellent because I already got a lot of work under my belt today, and I have a lot more work coming up later today. I am booked solid this week, which is awesome. In COVID times, that's not always the case. So I am just grateful for being in demand. That's a good thing to be. And there's also we have a guest with us today who's, I think he's also quite in demand. Not every one of you may know this yet, but this is a man that I've been let's say, I don't want to say chased, but John and I, we've been circling each other for, let's say, months, and it was largely due to my inability to nail down a time and date. But I'm happy that he's on here today, and we get some more stuff, collaborative stuff going on. We're excited to tell you about. So that I hope will also be in high demand with you out there live or watching the recording.
And stereotypes aside, may we say, well, it's morning. Well, it's not morning. It's not morning for me either. But anyway, I love to say this. Top of the morning, John.
Top of the morning. As long as you don't say St. Patty's Day, it's St. Patrick's Day. We're good. We're good.
Only men get to say that, and they hopefully get a strong Irish fist into their face for saying that.
Well, good to see you guys. Thanks for the invite, Brett and Christian. How you guys doing?
Ooh. Finer than Frog's Fur.
Good.
John, good. Where are you dialing in from? Where are you joining us from?
I am dialing in for Limerick. So Limerick, you might have heard of the concept of a limerick, for example. So we might as well start the recording. A limerick. So exactly. So I'm going to have a little bit of French here for this one for good measure. So there was an old man called Pat Sweeney. In Nice, he drank a quart of martini. The local gendarme rang his wife in alarm. Nous regrettons, Pat Sweeney est fini. That's your limerick for today.
The world.
I don't know any more than that, I'm afraid.
we need to get this typed out in the comments so people can actually recollect what that means.
So actually, let's do this. Let's invite people. If you're watching this live, you're watching a replay, and you know a good limerick, put it in the comments. We would love limerick. Limericks are fun. Yes.
So educate us. Limerick is a place in Ireland on the island of Ireland and in the Republic of Ireland. We want to make that distinction clear. And how come that the town or the place called Limerick is synonymous with a certain poem or a format?
That's a good question. This has been around for I might say certainly over 100 years anyway. It's a long tradition, or it must have been a poet came up with it at the time, this particular structure, and it became popularized and just grew more popular over the years. I don't have an exact name of who came up with it, but it's just been something that's been around ever since then. And it's the one thing that when you say you're from Limerick, people around the world goes, "Oh, I know a Limerick," and especially in the US, people tend to have probably maybe one up their sleeve, let's say, for especially those with an Irish, Irish American heritage.
Which which are colors that are proudly worn here in the United States, whether you are Irish or not. They're especially on a certain day in March, people discover their Irishness and then find that to be a great excuse to drink excess amount of adult beverages. So
I think they paint the river in Chicago usually green, for example, if I'm not mistaken, and there's like green everywhere. And I think the big St. Patrick's Day parades as well in New York and Chicago.
Yeah.
In Boston too. And
Boston, yeah.
Here's my Irish story, and I keep telling this to everybody who doesn't want to know it.
Mm,
Since I'm not American, I was born
mm,
and raised in Germany, and I'm actually from a certain part of Germany, the state of Bavaria, which, let's say, I'm going to exaggerate a little bit, without Irish influence, we would still be heathens. So it was not the Romans who brought Christianity across the Alps to
mm,
Christianize these wild Germanic people. In fact, it was Irish traveling monks in the 6th
mm.
century that came from Ireland to make us Bavarians into good God-fearing Catholics.
God,
Um,
fun
and
fact, I didn't actually know that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and many of the old monasteries in southern Germany can be traced back to foundations that were laid by Irish traveling monks. We still
Wow.
have in the Bavarian countryside, in rural areas, people still give their kids names that are somewhat in an Irish tradition. The one name that always comes up is Corbinian, which is basically the Germanized version of Corbin,
Mm.
a very Irish name. And that Bavarian Irish connection has been there for centuries, right? And you go to, well, maybe not this year, but in
Mm.
years where we don't have to wear masks and distance ourselves, you go to the Oktoberfest in Munich,
Mm.
and you'll be, I'll bet you 100 liters of beer. I'll bet you that you will encounter a bouncer or some kind of door security person at one of the Oktoberfest beer halls who is in fact Irish, who's there for the job.
That's a good one. Well, I'll tell you another fun fact of the day. I've a big connection in my family with Bavaria because I spent a summer working in Passau. Sorry, I spent a summer working in Munich. I wanted to try and get to understand German culture, so I spent a summer working in a Hard Rock Cafe opposite the Hofbräu House. But I then spent a year studying in Passau. But I actually have a brother of mine who's living in Munich now, and he got married to a young German lady last year. So yeah, we
Nice.
have a strong connection. Yeah.
Nice, lovely. And we just found out, and before we went live, that John and I, we've known each other for a while. But I didn't know, and I guess he didn't know either. We have the same alma mater. We went to the same university. We both went to University of Passau. So lovely, lovely to hear that here. This is
Mm.
some kind of global connection here. Awesome.
No, 100%. I think Irish people are very good at that, finding the connection, the relationship as well. I think it's funny. I mean, you give even a last name to somebody in Ireland, they'd say, "Oh, well, you're the McNamara from Laois. Do you know another McNamara?" Yeah, because it's such a
Mhm.
small country, it's quite easy to find the connection in some way. It could be a sports club, it could be a last name, it could be someone from work, let's say.
Right, right.
Mm.
Now, we made an announcement for this live session today, and we said you're a special kind of global if you are the parent of a daughter who has been to 23 countries before she had turned 2. So I took that from your bio. I don't actually know that story. So I'm curious, how did you become a nomad with a little kid in tow?
Yeah, it's a good one. So basically, when we were, first of all, myself and my wife Dee, we were always like huge nomads. We just lived for traveling, exploring the world, and meeting people from different cultures. And, my own work, I did a huge amount of travel anyway in my, let's say, previous corporate role. And I just loved it. I love working and dealing with different cultures. And so when Dee came up with the idea of Culturemee a couple of years ago, it became really critical. You've got to go and really spend time in these countries and get to know the people. There's only so much like talking to people from different cultures you can do if you haven't actually really been there. And so it basically made it our business to really go and travel as much as possible all around Europe, for example, and then spend 6 months, for example, living in Asia. And that's kind of how it came about. So we kind of had a base in Amsterdam where we're already living. And the great thing about Amsterdam, it's so brilliantly interconnected. You can just hop in a car and drive around, let's say. And then as well, then over in Asia, we based ourselves in Thailand, put Rosa into a creche there. But she was fantastic. So I basically, a little tip that we used is I just had Rosa for a lot of the trips where you'd be doing 3 or 4 countries in the space of, like, let's say 3 weeks, let's say. I had a little kind of an ergo baby where I would have Rosa attached onto the front of me, and she'd go to sleep in my chest, and I would be filming all the different videos of Dee, for example, with Rosa attached onto my chest. But it was very easy for traveling, for flying, and all the rest. But she got so much out of it, actually. She had, by the end of her 6 months, for example, in Thailand, Rosa was, she was like maybe 17 months old, and she was able to do like the sawadee ka, little bow, the Thai greeting, for example. And she got so much out of it, and she's turned out great since then. It was something that a really wonderful memory for us to have as a young family with Rosa growing up.
How old is she now?
She's 3 now. She's three
Three
and a
now.
half now. Yeah.
We have a 10-year-old who probably not 20 odd countries, but she's been to 12 or 14 or so, and speaks 2 languages, and with my Polish wife. But when we're working with parents that are going off to assignments with children, they often asking me how you traveled, what's your experience traveling with young children. I think it's been fantastic. I mean, certainly there are moments, but I encourage people to travel with children. I mean, they really do adapt. They conform, and they get used to the discombobulation and the ambiguity that comes with it. And I think, but the challenge is, I tell people, be careful of the child you're about to build, because now with our daughter who's 10, when the word vacation or holiday comes up in our family, her first thought is, which country are we going to? Not are we going to the next state? Are we going, what beach are we going
Yeah,
to?
that's fast. I mean, I know it's such a big kind of a dilemma for Dean, myself, because, I mean, for us, we feel we're so proud to be from Ireland. It's such an incredibly important part of our identity. But on the other hand, we also see how traveling around the world has been so enriching for us and for our mindset and for our experiences. So kind of for us, if we look to our kids for the next kind of 20 years, it's kind of trying to find that balance between, on the one hand, giving them an anchor of hopefully Irish culture, where they're going to be able to spend, let's say, the next 20 years, maybe a good 10 years of that in Ireland, if not more or less, who knows. But on the other hand, that there'll be moments where we'll be able to spend a couple of years traveling abroad and really getting under the skin of different cultures. Like, for example, I would love to spend more time in Asia again. I would love to, I would love to try and give the Middle East a go for a year or two. I'd love to go and spend some time, for example, in Africa, and maybe even in the US for a year or two. Who knows? I mean, for me, I think there's a deep hunger. Once you get the bug for this, you just can't let it go, I guess. It's such a huge part of your identity. But you're so right. I think, Brett, being careful of the child you're about to build, you've got to be very intentional about it. Isn't that right? It's very difficult balancing.
Yeah, I think, and it was always my intention to have Emily grounded in the Polish culture and the US culture. She's from here. She was born here. If she wants to make Daddy happy, she'll say she's an Aussie. She'll eat her fair share of sausage rolls and Vegemite. But it is, so it's great. Yeah, I think it's wonderful. I'm biased, of course. I say that to my clients. I'm biased. I really want you to build these children. I want you to build the understanding and the awareness.
I'll never forget, like when we were in Thailand, we were living in Phuket, and on this place called the Soy that had a fantastic fitness street. It was brilliant gyms, a great co-working space, but there was also a great creche nearby. And one of the things that blew me away when we went to Thailand is that I thought Europe people were really good at looking after kids, but my God, when we went over to Asia, particularly, for example, in Thailand, they were brilliant with kids. They're just another level of the respect and how careful and how fantastic they are, kids. And I'll never forget, we had, let's say, Rosa, I would take her in a little moped going to the creche nearby every day. And I'll never forget the second last day that we collected her from the creche. We were saying goodbye to the lady who'd been looking after her for those 6 months. And I literally started crying because I couldn't get over how somebody who'd been so good to Rosa, a total stranger, had been so good and taught me an awful lot about, wow, in a culture, how fantastic are looking after young kids, and being so grateful for it. Left a big imprint on me, I have to say. That's one of the things I would say from living in Asia, is the respect for older people and for kids. They're just really blew me away.
That's a lovely story. I'm curious. The travel bug is that, and of course, this is a sweeping generalization. Now, knowing a little bit about Irish history, especially Irish history in the last 250 years, a lot of people left Ireland because of unfortunate situations at home. So there's probably more people of Irish descent living outside of Ireland than are living in the Republic today. Is it that because the Irish became such a, I don't want to call it a diaspora culture, but a culture that was okay with leaving the island for better shores or more promising future. Is that something that is ingrained in Irish mentality, that let's go out and explore, or is it more of a personality trait? And there's a bunch of Irish who said, "Hey, leave me alone with the world. I'm happy the way I am here at home."
Great question. One of the things that's been fascinating is there's been big waves of emigration from Ireland over the last 200 or so years. So if you go back to the 1840s, 1850s, you had the Great Famine. There was a big potato famine where basically in the space of like 10 years, Irish people who were vast majority, there was none of them really landowners. For the most part, they were a lot of the Irish population, the Catholics in particular, were the ones who really didn't have access to, for example, a lot of basic foods. But potatoes were a huge part of their diet. And so what happened was with the potato famine, there was a potato blight, and you just couldn't have potatoes anymore. And literally, I mean, Ireland at the time had a population of maybe, I couldn't tell you for sure, but maybe 8 million, 7 or 8 million. And literally it less than halved overnight practically. You had a bunch of people died, but also people had to emigrate. So it was a huge wave of immigration that people were going over to, for example, Australia, the US, for example, and Canada and the UK, many other places as well. So that was the first kind of big wave you had of Irish people going abroad globally. So that was very much forced on the country at the time. But then what you had is in subsequent waves, for example, would have been a big one as well, would have been more recently in the 1980s. So the economy was really crashing. There was a lot of structural difficulties with the economy. It had been very
troubles, right?
Exactly. And so you had the troubles, but you also had an inwardly looking economy where people, there had been such a fierce, let's say, national pride ever since the country became a republic in the 1920s, that there was very much a reluctance to even try to export your goods internationally, to try and do everything yourselves. And as a result, it led to structural problems with the economy that they slowly but surely sorted out. But basically in the 1980s, we have a lot of members and wider family and friends and whatnot that had to emigrate in the 1980s, that created great lives themselves in the US and beyond. But then after that, then the next one that you had would have been in around the crash in 2007. That's where a lot of, let's say, people of my generation ended up having to emigrate by choice or otherwise abroad as well. So there have been these waves, big waves of immigration, which in many ways have created this diaspora, like you said, Christian, all around the world. But it's created these connections in many other parts of the world. For example, an Irish person thinking of going abroad to for example, Boston, you might as well, you're going to have like a little bit of Ireland over there. There's going to be so many Irish people in the community and whatnot, whether it's first or second level ancestry or whatnot. And so it feels like a bit of a home from home, these different parts of the world that are like that. So it makes it more accessible, I think. But I think on the other hand, I think because we're an island, because we're a small island, it also, you have people who do have a bit of adventure in their DNA, that for them, particularly when you look at let's say you look at the deregulation of the airline industry, it makes an island nation much more accessible to the rest of the world for people coming in, which means Ireland becoming more multicultural, but also people going out. So I think the fact that people can travel so easy around the world has made a big difference. And I think because it's a smaller size country, it has kind of fed into that hunger for adventure and seeing a bit more of the world. Certainly did for me anyway.
You mentioned, since there is such a great global Irish presence, that an Irish person leaving the Republic to go abroad, they will always find a piece of home abroad somewhere. There's this stereotype, and I want you to be transparent with us if that's true or not, because most Germans, when they go abroad, well, I don't know, let me correct that, most Germans, but many Germans that I know, when they go abroad, they will stay the hell away from anything that reeks of Germany, right? So I stopped going to German restaurants in North America because usually it's a disappointment. However, there's a stereotype that when the Irish leave Ireland and they go to Boston or to Sydney or wherever, first thing they'll find is the local Irish pub. Is that true, or is that, am I being too?
Well, it is. I think if you go back into Irish culture again, if you look at the pub is not just like a watering hole to have a few beers. It's a kind of it's a social place. Beyond just having a drink, it's where people connect. Right. Relationships get made, people catch up, much more so than in many other cultures around the world. And so when they're abroad, you have a lot of Irish people are let's say, can be home birds to a degree. They're very strong connection with home, and when they're abroad, they often want to find that connection, and that is one of the best places to find it. And it also helps the fact there's Irish pubs literally in every single city and town practically in the world. And so what I did, for example, when I went to the Netherlands, a lot of Irish people in the company I work with had challenges trying to settle into the Netherlands. I made sure I went to a town like Delft where there was like no Irish pubs hardly at all, where there was no Irish community hardly at all, and I would get a chance to really learn the language, speak Dutch and whatnot. But a lot of Irish people don't do that. A lot of Irish people have struggles integrating a little bit into other cultures because they just go easy into the kind of the expat mode, the expat communities, the Irish pubs and whatnot, and that becomes then a barrier to integration. So it's a bit of a kind of a chicken and egg. You want to try and connect with home, which is good. On the other hand, you need to try and give yourself a chance to integrate into the local culture as well. So it's a tricky balancing act.
So you speak Dutch apparently then?
Yep, I do. Ik spreek vloeiend Nederlands. So I was 8 years there, so I made a big effort. Fascinating one with the Dutch is that the Dutch speak all of them speak pretty much fluent English. But what's very interesting is when they're speaking with each other, even in meetings, or if they're going to, let's say, the water cooler or the coffee machine, they always speak Dutch. And so I had seen this before, and they're perfectly entitled to. But I also could see that how a lot of important conversations were taking place there. And so for me, I just knew if I could see myself spending a good number of years in the Netherlands. So I made a big effort to learn it. And look, I'll be honest, it did help that I spoke German. Now, saying that, I could read and understand a fair bit of Dutch already from the word go, but understanding spoken Dutch is impossible. You need to actually really get your head into spending proper amount of time there. And so I made sure, for example, that's where I went to Delft. You go to the local market in Delft and people speak Dutch to you if you speak Dutch to them. Whereas in Amsterdam, they speak English to you, for example. And also joined a local rugby team. I wasn't so bad at rugby. I wasn't exactly a professional, don't get me wrong, but I joined the local rugby team and they were all Dutch. It wasn't an expat rugby team, for example, which I could have joined. And so those kind of things definitely helped me to kind of understand the language. And I think it really helps. For me, it really helps during my time there.
So Dutch, German, French, and
French, obviously English, and also speak some Spanish and Irish. But this is going to sound absolutely crazy, but like Irish is the language I've learned the most in school, and it's the language I speak the worst. And I'm so ashamed of that. But a lot of Irish people will say the same. The way it was taught, certainly when I was younger, they've got a lot better at it, by the way. But the way it was taught, it was very much about the grammar, about the structure, and it was less about practicing it and having fun with it and being interactive with it. And so, yeah, you've a lot of. I mean, I speak some Irish. Don't get me wrong, and it's a very handy language if you're going abroad and you don't want somebody to understand you. But at the same time, it's definitely one that when I'm later on in life, I do want to go back and get fluent in Irish again. So it's an important part of the national identity. Yeah.
This might beg some explanation because I think Brett and we're aware of this, but not everybody who's watching this may be consciously aware of that. What are you talking about? Irish? Don't you guys speak English? So Irish is a Celtic or Gaelic language?
Yeah, it's a Gaelic. It's a Gaelic language. So it's the translation of Irish into Irish is Gaelga. So it's that's the origin of it. And as I said, they teach it literally from the age of 5 up until 80. For example, so you spend a good 13 years learning the language, but I'm not joking. Most people really struggle with it. I mean, I include, for example, some summers where I went to an Irish school for the summer, where you have nothing but speaking Irish, and even then, it's by far my worst language, by a country mile.
And they have to teach that in schools because the original Irish language, the native language that was spoken by the original people that lived there first, because of the English occupation, right? So it was English aggression and colonization that suppressed the Gaelic language. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I'm also seeing from Tamara is making a good point that they have a Gaelic language in Scotland as well. So there is that connection as well. It's a good, thanks, Tamara. Good point. But you're absolutely right. If you look at it, when let's say when the English came in and colonized Ireland over 800 years ago, they made a big effort to suppress the local language. And on the one hand, it's a gift because Irish people can now speak fluent English. It's a big asset in today's globalized world. But on the other hand, it's a big challenge because your nature, by nature, your language is a hugely important part of your culture. If you lose your language, you lose a little bit of yourself. And so if you look at it today, there's probably maybe maybe only 100, 150,000 people out of the 4 million population of Ireland that speak Irish regularly. But I think it's critical for us in the future to try and keep that language going. So I think that's one of the reasons why it's kept on as a subject, that at least everyone tries to learn it, to understand a part of their culture. And it means that, to be fair, it does mean that Irish people can't take on another foreign language. They might be able to take on one foreign language, or if they're lucky. But it does mean a lot of let's say, the courses and the teaching is spent learning Irish. But I think it's still important they do that, because it's such an important part of our identity.
How closely related is the original Irish Gaelic and the indigenous language of people in Galicia in Spain? There is some linguistic overlap, right?
Yeah, there absolutely is. So there's a couple of countries where there's a bit of they sprout out as a bit of an origin. I couldn't tell you to be sure. I do know, and my linguistics teacher back when I was doing commerce with German would shoot me for it. But definitely, there's a linguistic connection. You have, I think, if I'm not mistaken, you have Scots Gaelic. The Welsh is a bit of a connection there,
right.
And potentially also Galicia as well. Maybe one or two more. Yeah, but I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to get a slap in the hand from my linguistics teacher.
But that just tells us that your ancestors were a seafaring nation that exported beyond the island long before many other cultures did, right?
Yeah, so, absolutely. Yeah.
And one of my friends here in the United States, he is of Irish descent. I'm outing him here now, but that's perfectly fine. I think he'll give me permission. His last name is O'Shaughnessy, good old Irish name. And his Facebook profile, he made it a point to respell his last name in Irish, and I think it's called O'Shaughnessy or something like that. I don't speak Irish, but he found out. I think he taught himself, or he studied Irish, or how do you say it?
Irish, Irish, yeah. So Irish or Gaeilge, and if you want to translate it into exact English, but Irish is fine. Yeah, people get it. Yeah,
you'll find U.S. people of Irish descent who take their Irish heritage so serious that they take an interest in learning the original language, right? So it's not just people in Ireland. It's I guess diaspora Irish do similar things.
100%. And one of the things I've been really curious about is you find a lot of that Irish diaspora, they really get very deep and very passionate about it and so proud. It's a wonderful thing. I think they get really proud to go deep into their ancestry, deep into, let's say, the Irish culture, to understand their origins. And like you see, for example, a lot of, US politicians, that to a degree they're playing it for the votes, but they are genuinely proud of the Irish history. And I have come across that. When I was studying in UCD, I definitely came across some Americans that were spending time over University College Dublin, spending the couple of years doing exactly that. I think it's wonderful. If I do believe, I think it's Mara's mentioning as well, that the number of Irish speakers is actually increasing, which is good. It shows that there was a strategic focus by the government to try and boost the numbers of people speaking Irish, and hopefully that trend will continue.
Nice.
I have a friend who's a McGuigan, and he went to Ireland. He discovered his kind of Irish roots. He's a McGuigan. He's got the name. Although when he got there on the tour bus, and they said, "Is anybody Irish on the bus?" and he put his hand up, thinking that was the question. Do you have any Irish? And he said no. And the guide said, So where are you from? And he said, well, actually, I'm from Chicago. He said, well, you're not Irish. The whole bus just went quiet.
Hilarious.
Ouch.
But you know what? One of the fascinating things I found is with Ireland is, for such a small island, the accents can change massively, massively. I remember working for a summer I worked like 4 summers on a construction site at one stage, and one of the summers, it was one of the first summers there. This guy looks over at me and he says to me, "John, may I go away and get the Jenny?" I said, "I'm sorry, I have no idea." And this guy's coming from like less than 100 kilometers south of me, and I said, "I'm really sorry. Could you please repeat that again?" He said, "May you go away and get the Jenny?" I said, I kind of made out, will I go away and get the Jenny? Is Jenny a girl, or is who's she? What, you tell me more? What is a Jenny? And then I had to get the guy beside me to translate, and he said a Jenny is a generator. I was going, okay, I get it. But like this happened like a couple of times where you have people with really strong accents that in certain parts that it takes even an Irish person just a minute or two just to wrap. It's a bit like the whole Bavarian, the real strong Bavarian accent. It takes a bit of getting used to it, but you wouldn't think that in such a small island. But you do have pockets where it can be tricky to follow.
Well, I certainly came across that just in a couple of weeks in Dublin, just catch taxi cabs. Every driver had a different accent. They would tell you where they're from and all, because it was great. Yeah.
So learning or getting familiar with the accent, would it be okay as a non-Irish or somebody who is trying to fine-tune your ear to watch some movies or TV productions? I'm right now I'm thinking of something that my kids pulled up on Netflix a couple of months ago. We started watching Derry Girls. So
Derry Girls, yeah, that's a good one.
Is that authentic, or is this just made for a US audience?
So the Derry Girls, that one is based out of, if I'm not mistaken, so I've actually seen Derry Girls, a couple of episodes on it, and it is very authentic, and it's based out of, if I'm not mistaken, that's based out of, it's based out of Derry, obviously. Derry's in Northern Ireland, but still you can still get a sense of a little bit of a taste, because I mean there's a strong link between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. There's that will depend on the certain traditions and whatnot, but there is a strong link. Certainly over the last 20 years, that's something that's increased. So you can get a little bit of a taste. There are a couple of good ones. There's one called The Snapper is a good one. And there's another one, they called The General, which I saw yesterday. That's on Amazon Prime, I think, for example. The General. It's about this Irish gangster from, this guy was unbelievable. He robbed, I think it was the biggest jewelry heist of the 90s. He stole like literally millions upon millions. And it was reading about that. Yes. Exactly, yeah. And on top of that, then he stole like these like really intricate paintings worth literally, like again, tens of millions. And just he was really, really a real character, let's say. And I'm not saying all Irish people are gangsters; they're not. But again, it was a bit of fun. It gives you a sense of the different accents. Funny enough, a lot of non-Irish actors trying to do the Irish accent has great Father Ted, great one, absolutely great one.
we got to explain that. All right, so Father Ted, not everybody knows that. I wasn't woke to Father Ted until recently, and Brett actually made me aware of it. The kind of indirect communication style that some Irish people may display once in a while, and there's this clip of Father Ted the priest being offered tea by his host, and he declines it 3 times, and then in the end the host just pours the cup over his hand. So is that how? Talk to us, because we're going to talk about this in our webinar, John. So we'll talk about our webinar soon. But John and I will do a webinar on Irish culture next week. So you'll get the info in a minute here. But I want to make sure that we touch upon that. How indirect is Irish communication? So
this is just a classic example. You get somebody to your house, and you'll ask them. You say, Christian, come over to the house. You're more than welcome. Come inside. Listen, Christian, will you have a cup of tea? And you'll say, no, I'm fine. And then you'll say, oh, you will. You'll have a cup of tea, will you? And you'll say, no, I'm fine. I'm okay. And then you'll ask a third time, now, are you sure you will, of course, have a cup of tea. And on the third time, typically, the Irish person will say, oh, well, okay, fair enough, I will. But as an Irish person, if you don't ask, at least twice, if not 3 times, you'd be considered, well, Jesus, wait, that's the third time. I was going to say yes. And this is fascinating, because it wasn't until I mean, despite the fact I had traveled around the world, I'd lived in different countries at this stage, it wasn't actually until I went and lived in the Netherlands for a couple of years that I actually got to appreciate and understand Irish culture. Because, I mean, Dutch are very, very direct. And initially, I was like, well, that's a bit rude sometimes that they can be so direct. But I began to appreciate after a while that I actually like the clarity you got from people being direct when they needed to be. But Irish people, I sometimes got frustrated that they can be very, very indirect. And things like that, for example, that's a small, funny example. But for example, when you're giving feedback, And if you ask somebody, for example, let's say I'm giving a presentation to somebody in the Netherlands, and I ask them how was the presentation, the person in the Netherlands will go, yeah, that was crap. That's not going to work. X, Y, and Z was really bad. It was really terrible. But that part D over here was okay. But the rest of it, no, it's not going to work. Go back to the drawing board. Whereas for the same presentation, you give it to an Irish person. You ask them, well, tell me, what do you think? If the Irish person thought it was total rubbish, what they'll say to you is, well, you know what, very interesting presentation. I like A, B, and C. That part D, we might have a think about. But, look, well done, great effort. And I actually spoke to a Dutch banker about this when I was in Regina Coeli, a language school in the Netherlands. And he explained he did this to, for example, somebody from the UK. And basically he went and had this project worth a couple of million. He was going to hire about 10, 15 people. And he did it to his UK boss. And exactly that happened, where he's like, oh, interesting presentation, like A, B, and C. Part D, I'm not so sure, but listen, well done. And he thought that was the green light. He went, invested the money, hired the people, until about 3 weeks later, he got a really angry phone call from his British boss, who said, what the hell were you doing? And so that's something that could just as easily happen if it was in Ireland, I would say. Although, to be fair, it does depend on the individual personality, but Irish people typically are more indirect side.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And for those of you, I already put the banner in, I'm doing it one more time. For those of you who want to dive a little deeper into the intricacies of Irish culture and how that shows up at work, join John and myself next week. Here's a link. Should be easy to follow. We'll post in the comments as well. We'll talk about Ireland for an hour. Whoa. We're gonna do a deep dive here, and so Father Ted is not the only one that we'll use as a teacher. Brett, I sense a comment brewing with you.
No, this is great.
Okay.
Great. No, they're fantastic. I'm looking forward to it. I'm just when we do work, sometimes we get these projects in rashes. Just for the moment, I'm actually working with some people that are going to Ireland. The 3 or 4 people. So I'm excited to dive back into it, because I've got, that's where I got Father Ted from, was using a friend of mine in Ireland and he had the people that we were working with in complete stitches, the way he was describing Father Ted, and they went and they watched it, and they came back and they said it's exactly right.
No, 100%. And one of the things which is really fascinating, like these days, is in a post-Brexit world, you see Irish, let's say the diplomatic community of Ireland tend to have a lot more influence compared to before, a couple of years ago. So, for example, Pascal Donoghue is the chair of the Eurogroup, which is like the Eurozone finance ministers. You've got Ireland's on the Security Council now, for example. You've got very senior Irish people in the civil service of Europe in general. You've got the Trade Commissioner for Europe is Phil Hogan. He's Irish, for example. So you've got they've got a bunch of these around the world. So for whatever reason, is when it comes to, let's say, on global diplomacy, Ireland is definitely punching way above its weight in more ways than one. So maybe that's something to think about and maybe to explore next week as well, Christian. Who knows? We're looking forward to it.
And this is, I think, also highlighted by the comment that Tamara is making here, that non-Irish are often confused by the Irish indirectness and high level and high skill level in diplomacy, because the expectation is that Irish are, well, at least in North America, the expectation of the Irish is that they are the fighting Irish, the belligerent, the cantankerous, the confrontational types, and that stereotype doesn't live up to reality. Where do you think that comes from?
Yeah, it's a great one, and it's one of the things where Irish people, it's fascinating. So if they don't know you, or if it's in, let's say, a work setting, very, very indirect, extremely indirect. But if you're, let's say, a good friend, ferociously direct, like you get the knees ripped off of you with the slagging, people having fun and just having a bit of banter, let's say. But where it comes from
with me, I mean, that's
yeah. But it's one of the things where there must be, clearly, people from these islands just tend to be more indirect, and it's fascinating how, I can't quite put a finger on it, because if you, on the one hand, is it related to religious origins? What I don't know, because for example, Dutch, more of a Protestant background and more direct or whatnot, whereas for example, Belgium, they're more Catholic and very indirect. But it's much more complicated than that. There's so many different reasons for it. But all I can say is pretty much consistently around these islands, whether someone's from Scotland, Wales, or England, or Ireland, or Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland, they just tend to be more indirect. And it's one thing, I'll be honest, I find it fascinating. When I was working my old corporate career in CRH, it's Ireland's biggest company. It was in the European division, the Netherlands, and I was kind of a bit of the linking pin between, let's say, the Dutch, let's say, headquarters look after Europe, and the, let's say, the head office based in Dublin. And it definitely, that indirectness, let's say the directness versus the Dutch and the indirectness versus the Irish, I could really see how it really can cause a lot of miscommunication. And it was actually there we started doing a lot of intercultural courses, which really, really helped. But it's definitely something that, you know, I would say, you know, when I talk about one of the first things I start with when it comes to intercultural training is the direct versus indirect element, and being aware of it. Because if you can at least be on top of that, it's a great starting point. Because if you're not, it can cause you know, war and peace if you're not. But as for the origin of it, it's a very tricky one. I couldn't tell you exactly where that communication style comes from. I mean, even turning it around, let's say Christian or Beth. I mean, I know the Aussies tend to be more direct, I would say, and in, let's say, in Germany, for example, Christian, they're more direct as well. Where does it all come from? I guess this direct versus indirect.
Well, I always suggest to people, for Australians, because you know, I'm living in the US, I'm now used to the direct and low context, whereas Aussies are direct but high context. And and the way I say that is that we use humor and sarcasm as a context. To not so much directly confront somebody, but to bring a sense of lightheartedness into a conversation. And to do that, sometimes we come off as kind of very acerbic, and you know, I do tell people, if people are calling you names and that kind of thing in Australia, that means they really like you. It's hard to understand for people, but I found that, and before we went live today, I mentioned to John that my time in Ireland was interesting to really be aware of how comfortable I felt in Ireland, because there was that sense of, you know, people made a bit of fun at you. They poked you, they pricked your balloon a little bit to see how much you could take. But it's
kind of a mateness, kind of like you say in Australia, that being a mate and having a bit of fun with it.
Yeah. So it was just, and it happened to me in the pub the very first night in Ireland, when I walked into a pub, and there was a guy wandering around handing out sheets for a bit of a trivia night, and I was just alone, bellied up to the bar, you know, enjoying a nice frothy Guinness, and he said, "Would you like a sheet?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll play, mate, no worries at all." And he said, "Oh, you're Australian, are you?" And I went, "Yeah." And he immediately announced it to the whole bar, and I got jeers and
Love it.
And it's like, oh, nice.
Abusing the poor old foreigners.
Well, that is, you know. But I wasn't offended by it.
No, I know. It was a bit of fun.
That felt so much like home, it wasn't funny. Yeah, it was great.
While you were talking about this, I had an idea. Maybe some scholar who's watching this will set us straight. So my theory on where that stereotype of the aggressive or fighting Irish comes from, at least in North America, is the immigration story of the Irish, because the Irish immigration wave came to North America when there had already been other immigrants from other parts of the world, and especially in the Catholic areas where the Irish settled, there had already been Italians, there had been other or Polish, there had been other Catholics already, but the Catholics find each other and they had to carve out their niches, I guess, and that's when fighting amongst each other began. Gangs of New York would be a great movie to illustrate that. Scorsese picture that I love Scorsese, so watch that movie regardless. And then if you look at I lived in that region for long enough to speak with a little bit of confidence about it, is the Appalachian region, which was settled predominantly by Scotch Irish settlers who came with their own religious foundation. Lots of Presbyterians, a lot of Protestants who who rose up against the Catholic Church, whether it was in Ireland or in Great Britain against the Anglican Church. So they were the people on the islands in Europe were happy to see them go, and they brought their clan culture with them, right? There's this you belong to this bubble of the extended family, of the clan, of the in-group, and if my neighbors are the O'Reillys and we're the O'Shaughnessy's and you're the McDougals, then we may not get along with each other. And if you kill my cow, then I punch your nephew's teeth out. Well, I mean, there was an eye for an eye and so forth. So there was this, I think that there's this very territorial in-group thinking culture that these immigrants brought with them, helped shape that image of the Irish who can go in a fight easily, of whether that's true or not.
Well, I think in more recent years, you've always going to have bad behavior amongst the minority. For example, people who are not, drinking too much, for example, in the bars or whatnot, and getting into fights or whatnot. But I think, thankfully, it's more in the minority in most cases. But I think one of the things to look at is, if you look at it as well, in the last 20 years, Ireland has changed so much in the last 20, 30 years, ever since the Celtic Tiger of the 90s, this big kind of an economic miracle that kicked off then. You've seen an influx of a lot more people from different nationalities. And it's funny, if that's had a big impact on Irish culture, there's still a lot more work to be done there in terms of integration, in terms of stamping out racism for the people, for the small minority, for example. But in general, it's been very, very positive for Ireland. It's opened up Ireland in so many different ways. So, for example, the last Taoiseach we had, the last Prime Minister, was Lee of Culturemee, and he was a gay, half Indian, half Irish Prime Minister. And a great one. Did a lot of positive things with that as well. But that kind of signified, for example, the journey that Ireland has gone from being, for example, very reliant on the, let's say, Catholic Church, very inward looking, to being much more outward looking, and being much more progressive and much more liberal and much more, less conservative in their outlook, and much more multicultural. So that's left a big imprint. And I think also the fact there's been so many returning immigrants as well, Irish people who went abroad and came back as well, that's had a big impact on the shape of the country as well.
Nice. Well, what's the Irish word for Prime Minister? You said it, Taoiseach?
Taoiseach, yeah. Taoiseach. Yeah.
Okay. So that's what they call him in the media in Ireland, and abroad he's referred to as the Prime Minister. Exactly.
So they'll say the Taoiseach, or Taoiseach, or and brackets then Prime Minister. It's the equivalent of Prime Minister, let's say. Yeah.
That's a Gaelic word, or that's
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's exactly a Gaelic word. It's an Irish for Prime Minister. Yeah.
See, we never stop learning. This is what this program is about. Learn, people. Get to know the world. Lovely, John. It was awesome having you on. I could do this all afternoon.
Guys, it was a real pleasure. Really enjoyed it, Brett and Christian. Thanks so much for having me on. Really, really enjoyed it. And a shout out to Tamara as well, for of Theatre Ireland, for all of the questions and remarks as well. Appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Thank you, and we'll see you next week on Doing Business with Ireland. So you get more of us. So I'm sure you can't get enough of us, especially this dude. So hey, next week, sign up.
Looking forward to it, guys. Good to see you.
All right.
Bye now.
Bye.